Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I hope you've all had a hearty breakfast, kind of cushion last night's soiree a little bit. My name's Seth Barton. I'm the editor of MCV. I'd just like to thank Develop for having me here this morning to host this. And this morning's topic is rebellion, the path to independence. So independence is an attractive idea, I think we'd agree. It evokes freedom, creative expression, and keeping the lion's share of what you earn. So it's strange that in the games industry it remains relatively fleeting. The game studios often don't last. They become acquired, they have to join others to maintain their viability, or they simply close down. So if being acquired is the best possible outcome for a game studio, is that the best possible outcome for a game studio? Should more game studios retain their independence, especially at this kind of time where we see Microsoft and others buying up more and more content? So this morning, hopefully, we'll get a little bit of insight about that and a bit of insight from our speakers about their background. So to that end, we have two of the UK's most successful independent game makers, two brothers who've worked together for over 25 years, creating titles such as Sniper Elite, Alien vs Predator, Strange Brigade, and Battlezone. So please put your hands together for Chris and Jason Kingsley of Rebellion.
Sure. Yeah, that's one. Morning, everyone. Do we sit down? Yep.
Yeah.
So low, this seat.
Wakes you up, doesn't it? This time.
Come round a little.
Actually, there are more people here than there were when we first got here, so
yes.
Thank you for turning up. Can everybody hear at the back?
Yeah, if you can't hear, just keep quiet, okay?
Yeah. Thanks for being here today. So first things first, so Rebellion, 26 years now?
Yeah.
92, it's 92, it's coming up for 27.
27 years.
Yeah. The trouble with that is it gets so, it's like asking how old you are when you get older. You kind of have to count back and work it out.
And it's still completely independent. You guys run, make all the major decisions, and you own the whole business?
Yes, 50-50, Chris and me, shareholders. We have no external shareholders. No VCs behind us, no strange shadowy puppet masters pulling the strings, no Illuminati.
Right.
It's a hard audience, there's not a single.
And that was and has that been, how long has that been a conscious decision for? I mean, was it a conscious decision from the very beginning to?
Was it it's always been a thing we've aspired to and wanted to do. Actually, the very first game we ever did as Rebellion, Eye of the Storm, was self-published. So, but then we got into, I guess, a very comfortable world of work for hire. But then it takes a while to realise that it's not quite as comfortable as you think it is. In fact, we did work for hire well before Rebellion, so we had quite a few years of just working as freelancers. And there's a whole story there of how we got in, how we went from just being individuals and we're working with a sort of a disparate group of people to then say, look, we need to do something about it, and something about the situation, and become Rebellion. Well, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So in terms of your divide, as you're 50-50, who does what generally?
We both pretty much cover every aspect of it. Chris is a much better coder than me. I gave up coding on the Commodore PET, so that was some time ago.
I wouldn't really say you started it that much.
Well, okay, cool. I could peek and poke things, yes, and don't you remember? I had a
L-Shift-O, and
So it was very clear from an early age that I would have to adopt a different position as opposed to technology focused.
Art was
art
your
and
great
design, communications, writing stories, that kind of stuff, and it was quite complementary because you do the same kind of stuff, but you also have a technological background.
Yes, yeah. So technology and art, it seemed to actually be a really good sort of thing that fitted together for computer games. Obviously, and Jason was very much into sort of the Dungeons and Dragons, Tunnels and Trolls, those sorts of things, adventure books. He actually wrote one of the kind of the first adventure books.
I wrote quite a lot of choose your own adventure books.
When you were 18, you had a #1 bestseller. You sold over 1 million books.
Yep, Steel Eye and the Lost Magic, for anybody that's interested in it, by Ladybird. I got the rights back, but not the rights to the artwork.
So the path to independence is just write a bestseller at 18.
Would you know
Is that
what?
we're
Actually,
selling
It
here?
wasn't paid that much for it.
Actually, you know what? The path to independence is actually wanting to do cool things and make cool games and try to continue to keep the money flowing in and try to continue to, choose your own path, if you like, to use the same kind of game book method.
It's also about recognizing what are the risks. And as a work-for-hire developer, yes, there's a comfort level. There's a glass ceiling, though, which is generally down to your man-month rate. But then there's the publisher risk, which people don't really think about, which is the publisher can cancel your project pretty much for any reason. So in a contract, there'll be various cancellation clauses. One of them will probably be a cancellation for whatever reason the publisher wants, because quite frankly, in the past, you'll have found that publishers, if they don't have that clause, they'll make up some kind of thing. This texture.
They'll cancel on you anyway, regardless.
Yeah.
They'll fabricate some breach that you've done.
Yeah, and that leaves you with a big staff and no project.
Yeah, exactly. And you might have they'll pay you for a month. So, well, that's no good. You've got 50, 100 people working on this project. Take you 6 months to 9 months to get the next project. Yeah. And actually, if you look at the history of game developers throughout the UK, a lot of the problems they've had is when they've had projects cancelled by a publisher. We've seen friends of ours go bust because they just had a project cancelled, and there's nothing they could do to get another project in time to solve the problems, and they've never had enough kind of spare working capital to keep them going through a sizable gap like that.
I mean, theoretically, you do get, if your game sells incredibly well and you earn back against your royalties and stuff, you can theoretically get more money from the success of the project. But as people will know, that doesn't happen very often because of the way the numbers are calculated. There's incredible echo in here.
There is.
Is that, we just have to put up with it?
I think, yeah.
Okay.
It's your booming voice.
All right.
Try and speak a little more softly.
So we had fantastic success, actually. About half of our games, when we did work for hire, went into extra money. We got extra money for it, possibly, yeah? But we've had all sorts of excuses from people that should have been paying us money as to why they haven't paid us money.
Right.
And one of those was, well, we don't pay money very often, so we don't really have.
We're not used to
paying royalties out. It's like, okay, that's not a particularly good excuse. So as a work for hire is actually relatively safe, but you are hidden from the risks because you assume your publisher has got tons of money. Now the problem with that is that the publisher might not have tons of money, and there's plenty of publishers gone bust. As well, and so it's a bit like hoping somebody else fixes something for you. And not worrying about it. It can be comforting.
Closing your eyes and holding your fingers and praying.
So,
they're okay.
Yeah.
Not keen on that model, particularly.
Well, actually, it was all right.
It
was okay, but it's fraught with its own problems, which once you leave it behind, you realise those problems are bigger than you thought. And of course, it's very hard to bootstrap yourself. It's very hard to get enough money together to afford to make a game from start to finish and get it to the marketplace. Games are iterative, they take time. Whatever you planned at the beginning will probably not be what you end up with if you're doing it right, quite frankly, let alone if you're doing it wrong.
So then how did you bootstrap that first game? How did you, or when, at what point did you decide that you didn't want to do the work for hire kind of treadmill and you did want to start creating your own games?
Shall I?
Yeah, go for it.
We sort of tried to have a portfolio approach. So we had some big projects for third parties. We did Simpsons game and various Star Wars games for LucasArts and that kind of stuff. And they paid quite well. But we also tried to, in parallel, develop our own titles. So it's a sort of a portfolio approach to risk management, if you like. So we were not in a position to suddenly become fully independent. We sort of had to have this transitional period. We had to have this sort of adolescence of independence, which took quite a few years to kind of get to the point where we're now 100% funding our own titles. But there was a time, for example, was it Sniper Elite 3?
Yes, yeah, it was a co-development.
It was a co-development, and that came out of an interesting business conundrum. So our partners 505, they wanted to pay, there was a certain amount of money they wanted to pay, and it was less than the budget needed to be. We negotiated with them and said, actually, then we'll keep the PC version. They didn't want a PC version.
Oh, right.
And we've developed it on PC. So we said, okay, well, we'll keep the PC version and we'll keep digital rights because the budget you're paying isn't enough to cover it. And they were fine with it because they were largely physical. The industry was largely physical there. So it made sense for them, good business choice. It meant that we could scrimp and save and sort of put our bit of the budget into the game. And then we kind of split the proceeds going forwards.
Right.
And we anticipated the rise of digital, if you like. So we felt that keeping the digital rights would actually be disproportionately valuable to us going forwards. Because we continued to own the intellectual property and we felt that the long tail was important. And that has been the case. The long tail of sales has been a really important component.
Kind of at core, we always look at, whenever there's some adversity, we always say, well, how can we turn that to our advantage? Right. And that was the situation. Look, the budget wasn't what it needed to be. Okay, well, how can we make that work for them and for us? And that has worked out very well for us.
Yes.
So you mentioned intellectual property there, which I think is probably going to be one of the kind of core parts of independence. You can't be independent unless you own your own intellectual properties, really. You can't just work on other people's stuff. So at what point did you start to develop those properties? Because
right
Sniper Elite is your big property.
Yeah, but right from the very beginning, either Storm and various other Blade Warrior, we right from the very beginning wanted to keep ownership of our own property. Even if we sold the rights to a game, we kept the underlying ownership of the property so that we could do a sequel. We were in this for the long term, so I was thinking, well, in 10 years, platforms would have changed, things would have changed. There'll be a new generation of games players, and if this game is really good, maybe I can make a new version of that game for another generation.
And it's the same with the technology as well, so it's our own engine, and again, part of what we did when we were negotiating with the publisher was saying, look, we own our engine. The number of contracts that we've seen other people, when in those days they say, well, the publisher owns the engine. It's like, well, you can't reuse that then. How can you do another game? So we did that, and another area that we negotiated on was to make sure that we owned all the generic assets.
Right.
And I can't just say, it's like concrete, trees, walls, bricks, those sorts of things, trash cans, because they're generic, we could use them across multiple projects. That allowed our publishers at the time to save money because they wouldn't have to we wouldn't have to keep recreating those assets. And meant we could use them on other things. So.
Yeah, and you've continued to use your own technology. Lots of people have moved off to using Unreal or Unity, but you've always maintained your own. And what kind of advantages has that given you?
There are many, many advantages. Yeah. Principally, we are in total control of what our engine and our technology does. So we don't, we're at the top of the list for getting bugs fixed. We get access to the source code without having to pay extra money. We get bugs fixed when we want them. But also, most of the people that we speak to, they use these external engines, and they're not always very complimentary about them because they'll, for example, they'll have to. Oh, there's another build of the engine. It's come out another version. We've got to then spend 2 weeks reintegrating, and everything we fix it says broken. This is how. There's a lot of effort. So actually, in fact, if you've got your own engine, it's probably just as much effort to maintain and develop it as it is to be using an external engine.
And it kind of also lets you differentiate your titles and lets you move into areas like VR, because you were quite early.
Yes, we were a launch title. Battlezone was a launch title on PSVR. And other things that we can do, it allows us, for example, Strange Brigade was a very early Vulkan title, and in fact it is still the world's only multi-GPU Vulkan title. In fact, I think it's one of the few DirectX multi-GPU titles as well. So and it's being used to this day by Kronos and the various other guys AMD and NVIDIA to work up all their drivers for Vulkan.
The great thing about that is it gives us direct access to the technology vendors. Because they obviously the engine suppliers have their own access, and those engines are great. They get you going very quickly if you don't have the infrastructure to have technology.
I think I've worked out every time you turn over there, you get that echo. I think it's picking up that second mic. Maybe Or if we spread out a little bit, it might help.
Okay.
How is the echo for you guys? Is it just? It's okay. It's just us.
Right.
It's annoying.
Okay, I'll move over here. Sorry, we'll separate a bit. So I think third-party engines are great to get going, to get you up and started, and especially if you don't have technology people in your company to begin with who can do an engine. We kind of started out that way, as most people did back in the day. There weren't third-party engines to hire, so you had to roll your own. And we never stopped doing that. And other people have for all sorts of different reasons. So I don't think we're necessarily down on third-party engines as you know, they're not evil or anything. But I think, again, I visualize a snowplow clearing snow in front of you, and somebody else's engine is, helps you clear the snow, but there's still a ton of snow you've got to get over. And at some stage there's a big pile and this snowplow won't go through it. Maybe I've stretched the metaphor too far. At the end of a project, you've always got that perfecting phase, that polish phase. Your frame rate, maybe there's a few places where your frame rate is dumped on. And if it's your own tech, your own team can laser focus on those problems. If it's in the engine, what are you going to do? Sorry, the engine does it that way and there's not a lot I can do. But I do think the engines help people get up and running very quickly. They do have a certain look as well. Everybody's engine has a certain look. I'm sure our Azura engine has a certain look as far as games players are concerned.
Okay, so coming back to this idea of developing IP, I mean, you own a lot of IP.
We own a shitstorm of IP. Well, we own, basically, our IP goes back to 1888.
Right,
Which predates the computer games industry, This is our comic library, in case those of you who don't know. So we bought 2000 AD in the year 2000, which is very convenient for remembering it. We then bought a whole bunch of comics from 1970 onwards from Egmont, who we bought 2000 AD
Roy
from.
the
Rovers and that.
A lot of kind of boys' own kind of adventures.
And lots of girls' own.
Yeah, there were lots of girls' comics, actually. We know when girls' comics stopped being comics.
Right.
There was a couple of months of history. It's really interesting. Donny Osmond is to blame, by the way. But we won't go there. And then Time Inc. were having some financial restructuring, and we said, but you've got this whole back catalogue from pre-1970s all the way back to 1888, and Comic Cuts for Boys, which was one of the first boys' funny papers, which is where the word comic, we think, comes from.
Yeah, because they used to be called funny papers.
They were called funny papers for boys and funny papers for girls. And so we own all of that. Now, a lot of that's out of copyright, of course, but we've got this archive, so we go all the way back there. Things like Billy Bunter and Sexton Blake and the Spider and all sorts of interesting characters, which predate superheroes, for example. Yeah. But we've always liked telling stories. It's always nice to revisit the place you've created. And going back to the earliest days in school, when I used to be a dungeon master for my role-playing game buddies, I'd create landscapes for them to explore, and Chris did the same. And so really, what we're doing in computer games is creating landscapes. If you've got a landscape, there's lots of different ways of exploring it, and therefore intellectual property and controlling that landscape and how you explore it is a wonderful thing. People like visiting the same place again, but in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, our IP catalogue was described actually fairly recently as the biggest IP catalogue in the world that you've never heard of. It's a massive catalogue. So I think we will count it. I mean, it's literally miles of shelving.
We've got 1 3/4 miles of comics.
Shelving, yeah.
Comic shelving.
Yeah, that's not on its side. That's
pages of comics.
And I think we started calculating. I think they got to 55,000 characters and gave up counting.
Yeah, it's a lot of IP.
Probably more
even even like the more known about like 2000 AD stuff. I mean, it's not. I mean, it hasn't turned necessarily into games.
Well, we wouldn't have been able to buy it if it was Disney scale or Marvel or DC.
Yeah.
So we've got quite a hill to climb to kind of bring things out.
But we've done some 2000 AD.
Oh yeah.
But we don't. What we didn't want to be known as the guys who do 2000 AD games.
Right.
So
that was quite important to us. We're independent, we're creative people, and we want to do our own independent games. So where it makes sense to use an existing intellectual property, great, we'll do that. It's a fantastic place to start. And where it doesn't make sense, we'll create originals like Sniper Elite or Strange Brigade. That's how it works.
And to be fair, we've got quite a lot to choose from. So it's like, why don't you use one of your own IPs? Okay, which of the 55,000 do you mean?
We keep getting asked, have you got a list? No, we really don't have a list of them. Not yet.
So I guess that the we've talked about this before, but one of the kind of core things about Rebellion becoming independent is the rise of self-publishing. Like, at what point did you start publishing your own titles, and how, and at this point, how much of that function is internal, and how much of it are you still using partners and other people?
Well, I mean, our first game we ever produced, Eye of the Storm, was self-published.
Right.
We did Gunlock. So we've always been trying along the way, and you know, I guess it's taken us a few years to get to something that's successful. So
we do it all in-house. So we've got 350-ish 50-ish people that work
It's quite
for us
difficult
in
to
4
remember.
different locations.
Exact number.
Oxford is the headquarters. We've got Warwick, we've got Runcorn, and then Wakefield, which we call North.
Because we already had an RW.
Because we had,
which is Warwick. Should have been Leamington, but hey.
So we have all of that function now. We have to. As you expand the number of games you make and the amount of content you create, you need all those support staff, all of those ancillary skills. So you need more people in accounting, because somebody's got to do the spreadsheets and work out who owes what to whom and that kind of stuff. You need more management. You need more QA. QA is hugely important. QA is an underappreciated aspect, I think, of games development. Good QA can really make a game very good. Audio is hugely important. Audio can make graphics look better. There's all sorts of components that go into making a game. And yes, you need PR marketing, you need community support, customer service. There's a whole bunch of things that you add as you go along.
But very much digital was our focus, because when we sort of did our most successful period, you know, recently with self-publishing, we looked very hard at, do we want to build up a physical publishing and distribution group? And we felt that, look, the rise of digital, it's probably going to take us 5 years to get a successful sort of physical publishing group. Do we want to be spending those 5 years, or do we want to find someone who's great at doing that, get them to do it whilst we build up and focus on our digital side of things? And that's the route that we chose. So Sold Out have been very, very good partners to us. For the physical, they've got a lot of experience, know the physical world very well, and we've been really focusing on the digital.
So independence doesn't have to mean doing it all yourself.
No, you can't do everything yourself. You have to have partners. I think one of the biggest learnings that we have is how much you then have to start spending on PR and marketing, and like how much on advertising and marketing.
Yes, you sometimes get your budgets presented to you for your next game, and you go, how fucking much are we spending on advertising? Good God. But you have to. You've really got to communicate out there. The biggest challenge, I think, these days, apart from making a good game that people want to play, is discovery.
Apart from the small part of making
but assuming we're all competent games developers in this room,
okay.
you know, we have the confidence we can make games, hopefully. So let's assume that's a given. But you've actually got to get it out to people, and there are some superb games out there that nobody's ever heard of. So the challenge, I think, for us is no longer distribution. There was a time when, as an independent developer, you literally couldn't publish your own games. You were not allowed to. There were physical barriers put in the way. You know, you had to have various publishing slots and all that kind of stuff, and tons of money to pay.
You had to have a cartridge manufactured, and you had to fight for a slot.
It was effectively a closed shop, so it was literally impossible. You could sort of self-publish on PC, but that market wasn't very big. You could publish back in the day on cassettes and that kind of stuff. But then the market shifted to sort of physical infrastructure and that kind of stuff.
The number of times we've heard, but you're a developer. And that's the reason why you can't do something. But you're a developer.
Yeah, I literally, there's some publishers no longer with us, and I won't mention names because it's embarrassing for them, but they had failed to pay us for something that they owed us. There's no argument whether they owed us or not, but they just hadn't paid us. So I walked into there, after long, convoluted conversations with various people, I walked in with a winding up order. And I said, this winding up order, here's a copy of the winding up order, which for those of you who don't know is a thing you go to court to get them to pay the money. They admitted they didn't have any money, which is the thing you can wind somebody up for because they don't have the money, so fine, I'll go in and grab what you've got. Went in there, and the first thing the chief executive said to me is, you can't do that, you're a developer. And I said, well, I'm a business person, you know, you owe me money, you've said you can't pay it. I'm gonna grab your assets first tomorrow unless you pay. They paid me, Next week, the week after, they went bust. Literally taking everybody else's money with them. So sometimes you just have to say, no, we're not the minority partner here. We make games. This is the important underpinning of the industry. If we didn't have games makers, there'd be no games industry. There'd be nothing for anybody else to sell. So we should be the sort of ascendant ones, if you like. We should be the people on top of the pile that everybody else wants to work with and is scrabbling to work with. But that wasn't the case back in the day. It's shifted and changed now. And of course, with digital distribution, it is easier to get your game out there. It's not easier to get discovered, though.
No.
Yeah, it's funny, we're still more comfortable using the D word than the P word to describe ourselves.
Yes, it's slightly embarrassing at the moment because we are a publisher, and I don't like being a publisher, really. The principle is I don't want to be a publisher, but we do publish for other people. We do that.
I think that now you're all just games companies now.
Well,
that maybe that division is but
content
it's very
creators,
hard after.
There are still people in the industry who were in the industry back there, So.
Yes. So in terms of those extra functions that you have in-house, having the kind of marketing and all the PR, presumably there's a minimum number of titles that you need to be putting out a year in order to keep those people busy?
We don't really think about it that way.
No, it's not quite like that anymore. I mean, yes, a few years ago you just put out a game and then 6 months later, a year later, you put out another game. It's not that now. It's much more about, okay, your game's coming out. Right, we've got DLC. When's that coming out? You're keeping supporting that. We've got a sale here. We've got that here. We've got this. We've got a conference here. We've got a show here. So it's very much about, it's a long game. If you think of, well, I'll just put my game out and that's it. I mean, you'll do okay, but then you'll have a big gap to the next one. The trick is, how can you keep your game interested?
It's the long tail. So you've got a whole teams of people who are managing your long tail.
Yeah. I mean, and for those of you who are interested, every game we've ever released follows a power law curve of sales, and it never gets to zero. Anybody that understands the maths, it never gets to zero. Well, eventually, ad infinity, it will get to zero, but that's a long time away. And so if you can build up that long tail of all your different titles, you've got this sedimentary rock piling up slowly, and you're not doing anything, and there's a little bit of money coming in, and then you look back and you go, actually, that little bit of money's turned into a modest amount of money now.
The games that we're selling from over 20 years ago are still
bringing in money.
Wow.
For us.
Yeah.
That's why you have to, on contracts, where you have to make sure you have as long as you can on things. And that's one reason why we don't tend to use licensed music on games, because they're often, we've seen quite a few games.
Music licensing is a bit of a minefield. So if you embed really cool, trendy music, it dates your game very quickly, because that won't be cool, trendy music in 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 20 years' time. And B, you'll have to take it out of the game if you want to keep releasing your game. And there's some big titles out there, skateboarding titles and that kind of stuff, which had fantastic soundtracks of the era, and they can't be published in that way anymore. Right. So it's something to consider. It's very tempting to license classic, to license great tracks, but it comes with its own problems, not least the cost of them.
Yeah, they're surprisingly expensive.
Yeah. I guess if we're going to talk about self-publishing, we have to talk about platforms and just how many there are now. I mean, it used to be that...
Yeah, but you say that there are lots of them, but actually they're all the same underneath. They're all AMD or NVIDIA graphics card,
I see,
Intel
hardware
or
platforms,
Intel
but also
or AMD.
storefronts as well as...
There is that, but that's a layer on top, really. Back in the day when it was hardcore, when all of this was fields, Stonehenge was being built, there were proper differences between the various different pieces of hardware, proper custom chips, and anybody that's been in it for a long time will know when a new piece of custom chip turns up. And we worked on the original Atari Jaguar.
Yes.
And that was interesting.
64-bit.
First one, wasn't it?
Did you work on the CD expansion that never really...
We did have them, yes. Yeah.
We had those, the Jaguar toilet bowl.
Yeah, that's the one.
And we worked on the VR version, the VR stuff as well.
There was a VR game on that, Really? Yeah, never came out.
Anyway, but things are easier to develop on now than the Atari Jaguar.
Yeah, well, you have tools now. You have debugging tools. We're actually in arguably a much easier time to make games than ever before, but it's just as hard to sell them.
Right.
So, I think it's a wonderful opportunity out there right now.
I mean, in terms of talking about storefronts a bit more, I mean, you've had stuff on Xbox Game Pass. Obviously, you're, on all the main stores, Steam, So I do have a little bit of a bone to pick with you.
Sure, fire away.
Because on the cover of MCV's May issue, Jason was quoted as saying, "I would need a bloody good reason to do an Epic exclusive." And then in July, he announced an Epic exclusive. So
That's because he had a bloody good reason.
Yes, exactly. So what I wanted to know
People can guess what that bloody good reason was, can't they? It's not exactly effing rocket science,
No, anyway, we're not politicians, so we can say what we like.
Yeah, genuinely, I think, I would prefer not to do exclusives, but I understand Epic's positioning in it, and quite frankly, they're paying through the nose to build their store. All credit to them, it's fantastic, and we'll take some of that money, thank you very much.
In the long run, though, do you think there's a benefit to you of having more stores?
I think competition in any marketplace is benefiting everybody, including those people who are being competed against.
Right.
So we're good friends with Steam. We know Steam really well, and they're great colleagues and personal friends of ours. And so, it's a little bit difficult to tell your friend you're going out with somebody else. But they took it very well. They're great people. They engaged properly with us, and they understood the reasons behind it because it's a pure business case. And I think partly it's also a bit of a kick up the backside for anybody when a new incumbent comes into a marketplace. It makes you reflect. New developers turn up with a brilliant game and you go, bloody hell, that's brilliant. We better have a good look at that and how have they done it? And it makes you focus on your game as well. It's exactly the same for multinationals, exactly the same for an enormous company.
Yeah. Look at Sony, look at Microsoft. They're going head to head and pushing out, we've got the best technology. Nintendo are there. There's massive competition. And the times when it gets too far out of whack, when PlayStation sort of 2 was so successful compared to Xbox, things.
You could argue Sony sat on their laurels a bit in that generation. That's for historians.
Cutthroat competition, and it's great to see that. It helps everyone.
But I have to say, it was a little bit of an embarrassing interview to give, and then 1 month later to then have the opposite.
Ironically, we had been talking with them in the background, but it kind of kicked things off a bit faster. They went, oh.
I was aware.
Ironically,
I was aware that Epic were doing exclusives, obviously, because that was the question. But we hadn't actually been offered anything at the time.
Yeah.
It would have been, and I didn't really think they would, because typically they were going for the sort of super big titles, which is great because they obviously count our new title, Zombie Army 4, as a big title, which is great. It's a really nice bonus for us. And I was quite impressed by the numbers that they offered.
And I have to say, working with them, they're really like the Steam guys, they're a really nice bunch of guys. And what's great about both Steam guys and Epic is they're ex-developers. That actually really makes quite a big difference to how they perceive you, how they work with you. That it's really, we see eye to eye rather than like, hey, we're up here and you're down there.
They're never going to turn around and go, but you're a developer.
Exactly. And also Epic were very keen to help support the game, give it a lot more marketing than we might have expected. So that's to everybody's benefit, really. So,
so
it was fantastic.
The store isn't inundated yet, so presumably you'll get a lot of space on the front of the front page.
We get a lot of and we get support from Steam as well. It was just that Epic offered a very attractive package, and that as an independent, again, you sometimes as an independent developer, you've got to take your chances. When something like that is offered, when you have the opportunity, like we did with Sniper Elite 3, to sort of share in the risk and share in the reward, that was part way towards full independence. And deals like Epic offered don't come along that often, and therefore you have to sort of search your bank account and work out whether you want to do it or not. No, did I say no? Soul. I meant soul, not bank account.
No, we actually genuinely did agonise about it.
We did,
We genuinely did. It's should we do this, should we not do this? We've got a great relationship with Steam. We really like the Steam guys.
and obviously there's a player base for the game on Steam. So that's the main agonising that has to be done.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't the main agonising. It was an element of it. Right. Generally, was the Steam guys. We really like them. They're great guys.
We like working with them.
We like working with them. Will this upset them or not?
That was the biggest issue, was how how much negative impact is going to have on our friends at Steam.
This is the joy of independence. This is freedom, isn't it? This
is the freedom. This is where you have the where the responsibility is. But there are big developers out there that have had this done to them by their publisher without even knowing, and that's even worse because they can't sit here and go, well, they can sit here and go, it wasn't my fault. We have to take the blame for that decision.
Or if they're allowed to talk about it.
Or if, they probably wouldn't even be allowed to, true.
Yeah, we've been told to don't talk to the press many times in the past on games.
So, I mean, I guess that independence on a daily basis means that you can make decisions quickly, that that you're not, that you don't have to think about what someone else might think, and that must extend to creativity and business decisions and all kinds of things.
Well, as a big company,
is there I don't know what's the word, a kind of an overall outlook of just kind of like, well, we're independent, so we can make a decision and get something done and push on?
No, not really. It's an absence of. There's a certain lack of formality within the company. People that have joined the company from big corporate entities are sometimes surprised by their informality. Somebody sitting in there, when he's in his first few weeks, put together a 42-page presentation about a PowerPoint that he wanted to do. And apparently we rather disrupted him by saying, can you just flick to the last couple of slides, please? And what's the summary? Yes, that'll do. And he went, oh. You learned, didn't you? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we've only got one of our biggest limited resources is time. And as you get bigger, you do have to have formality. You've got formal accounts to put in every year. You've got tax to pay, R&D tax credits and games tax credits to claim, and all that kind of structure that goes with it. You've got HR issues and an HR department. So naturally, there's more formality as you get bigger. But that formality should be there to underpin the company and help support the proper functioning of it. But I don't have to go in, dress in a suit and tie, and present to glassy-eyed board members who don't give a stuff what the games are. They care about the bottom line. We care about the bottom line, but it's not the only thing we care about. In fact, it's probably not the most important thing. As long as you've got enough money coming in to do the next game, that's what's most important. And so there's a whole bunch of corporate admin that's missing, that we don't have to spend money on and time on because we don't have anybody else to blame.
Yeah, but it's also about empowering the team members. And we're not there looking at the games every single hour, every single day, but we'll come in, we'll do reviews, and we'll have suggestions and improvements, and things will get improved. But it is very much, this is what the game is. Here's a 1 or 2 page. Let's get on and do it. The teams work on those features, decide on them. We all agree where we're going, and occasionally, this would be a nice thing to have.
We sort of nudge, don't we?
Yes,
we have this sort of role. I always think of our role as nudging the games in the right direction. We initiate them, and then we nudge the team and kind of challenge and ask the slightly awkward questions. Is this bit fun? I know it's in the design, but is it actually fun to play? And those kind of things, and ask the teams to rise to the challenge. And that's really what our role as company directors is empowering our staff and our teams to make the best games they can. And sometimes challenging time frames, sometimes we don't have the biggest budgets in the world. Our games don't cost 100 million to make, not even close. But there's still a substantial number of millions quite often. So there's a lot of money goes into it, but not as much as some. So
Yeah. So and what's the head count now?
Just
50-ish,
350-ish.
Yeah,
and it's consistently, you've managed to keep a kind of consistent growth?
Well, that's not really the objective. The objective is to take on exactly the right number of people with the right skills you need to do any projects you've got going at the time, which of course, as anybody that manages a company will know, is next to impossible. So then you've got to manage the head count. What we don't do is hire and fire as we need.
That's what I was trying to,
We just don't do that. That's just wrong. We do hire and fire. We sometimes sometimes people leave the organization because they haven't fitted in or they haven't done the work properly or something, but it's very rare.
Or the next opportunity.
Or they want to go and live in America or Canada or something, and that's fine. And a company is like a living organism, there's inputs and outputs, but the company marches on. But we don't hire a bunch of people, make the game, and then get into that awkward situation of needing to make this quarter's financials work for the shareholders and have to fire a bunch of people. And then, by the way, hire them back next quarter. Which the public doesn't know and the shareholders don't notice. And that creates instability, so we don't do that.
How do you maintain that stability, though? It's just a matter of planning ahead and making sure that all the projects are lining up, because do you use outsourcing to help?
We do use some outsourcing on art, and that helps. That really helps with kind of when you need a lot of bulk art. But we very much focus on this is the key art. So our teams are concentrating on the best pieces, the most exciting pieces,
the hero bits, and that kind of stuff.
And then the filler stuff that tends to go out to.
If we need 50 different street lights, for example, we might design 5 of them in-house, and then the in-house concept will design the rest of them, and then that might go to outsource to do the bulk work.
Yeah, it means our guys can concentrate on, say, the cool stuff, the most fun stuff.
But it's a never-ending sliding block puzzle, working on projects simultaneously. And I think possibly one of the best policies we have, and it's an unofficial policy, is sort of N-1. There's never quite enough people to do it, which means that everybody's working, everybody's not stressed, but everybody's got things they've got to do, because not having anything to do is actually really bad for morale. Having too much to do is bad for morale as well.
Yes.
But not having much to do till next week is actually quite draining.
If there's a little bit more than the amount you need, it also makes everyone's job slightly more secure, doesn't it? Because they're not like
exactly right. And you'll know as a journalist, having a deadline does focus the mind.
Oh yes, it does indeed.
Yeah, and also,
I still make magazines, so we have real deadlines, not those kind of, hey, maybe we could put it up online tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah.
So do we, weekly.
Yeah.
2008 weekly.
2008 is weekly.
Yeah.
Since 1977.
Yeah. So we share that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I must
How's
get
that for
my
pressure?
subscription running again.
Yeah, well, you can do it digitally if you want to. Yeah, 2008 online.
Save the trees.
Yeah.
Although you've remained independent, recently you've acquired a number of other studios and brought them into your.
Yes, absolutely. But we don't.
Don't ask them questions. You'll never get a word in.
Yeah. We haven't gone out to look for people to acquire.
Right.
We've never done that. Opportunities have come up in conversations, and situations have been such that there's an opportunity to acquire somebody. And if they're a good fit, if we worked with them before, if they're friends, if it makes sense for us financially, then then why not?
So
and there's an emergent component. If hiring individual people, they've got to take time to get up to speed. They might not gel with individuals or gel quickly with individuals. But if you acquire a team of people that work together, there's a sort of an emergent property there that's sort of quite valuable. They've worked together, assuming they're good at what they do, which they must be. There's an added value. It's really hard to put it into actually pounds, shillings, and pence. God, I'm showing my age.
Kind of the culture.
Yeah.
And if that culture works with Rebellion's culture, then you can bring them on board much easier than you can bring on board 13 individuals and hope that they all stick.
Yeah, well, hopefully those 13 people are greater than hiring 13 random people who are good at their job.
Okay. So, in a way, we're talking about independence and retaining independence, but on the other hand, obviously for some people, being acquired is actually the best step forward, but to maintain their stability and the viability of the studio.
Yeah, I would think so. Well, we're probably not the people to ask about it. They should ask some of the people we've acquired whether they think it's a good thing or not. Hopefully, they'll all say, yes, it's a good thing. It's kept their jobs stable. Yeah? Yeah. So that's the thing, jobs and stability, I think, is really important for people, and they can get on with the rest of their lives without having to worry about are they going to make their mortgage payment or be able to.
Yeah, the other factor, for people that own companies is there's a lot of stress on people. They're going, where are we going to get the next project? They've got their finances. They've got to think, I've got to pay these people. When's the next milestone coming? There's a lot of pressure, and it's quite attractive for some people to say, look, can I hand those problems over to someone else? Or can I just make games? Because most people, like us who founded companies, went into making games, set up their companies to make games. And there's all this other crap they have to deal with just to make games. And we've accepted that we can't make games in the same way that we used to. So our roles have metamorphosized so much from the old days. Jason doesn't do art anymore. I don't do programming anymore. So probably people are probably quite great.
I think I was quite good at D-Paint back in the day.
You were very good at D-Paint, yeah. You did some really good 3D stuff on graph paper before there were any applications.
I remember before there were tools to make things. Anyway, shouldn't reminisce too much, but I do remember typing in matrices for...
We did some really interesting characters in full 3D, using 20-odd polygons and animating them to make them look really interesting. So he's a very talented artist, actually.
Thank you very much.
Maybe one day you'll return to it.
Well, there are much better people that work for me now.
So I guess my main worry today is that I'm going to say to you, you wouldn't sell your company, and
don't ask him. He'll
I'll
change
just say
his
I
mind
have to have a bloody good reason.
Exactly.
Won't I?
And you're going to tell me a bloody good reason, and we'll be sitting here, in 2 months' time, you'll be owned by Microsoft, and you won't be able to say, and I won't be able to interview you anymore.
Exactly.
Which would be a huge loss for me.
We've been approached many times by people to be acquired, and it's never worked out for us. I've never felt it was a good thing for staff or for the company or for what we wanted to do. One of the reasons I never say never in interviews is because you never know. And I don't really like lying. If somebody says, "Would you ever sell?" It's like, well, I suppose yes. I can imagine absurd scenarios where we might. But those scenarios are so absurd, and I'm a creative, so I can come up with really absurd ideas. Then I don't. Basically, no.
We're not. Unlike some companies, we're not going out to be acquired. We don't have investors, VCs, whose job is to build up a company and then sell it for a profit. So that's the difference. Is we don't have someone behind us who says, "Look, get big, get sold."
And you haven't floated the company either.
I think it'd be very unlikely we'd want to float, because I think that's just a lot of hassle.
We've got colleagues who have floated, and they tell me that my job as CEO would change entirely from running the company and making games to managing investors.
Right.
And going to board meetings with glassy-eyed investors. And I don't like the idea of doing that. I wouldn't want to do that necessarily.
But never say never.
Yeah.
And on the never say never, if someone came to you a couple of years ago and said you were going to open a TV studio and put a feature film into production, then was that in your mind?
Yes.
Or?
And part of what we do is our job is to think many years in advance, to think multi-steps. So, and I think that's the sign of good management, good owners of a company, good developers, is how far ahead can you think?
So for those that don't know, they'd have now a TV studio.
And we wanted to. We played around. We've worked with. We co-produced the Dread movie that DNA did, but we didn't have that much. We had quite a lot to do with it, but not as much as I would have liked. And whilst it was a great movie, they did things that I would have done slightly differently.
It's a good movie, though.
Oh, it's a fantastic movie, absolutely brilliant.
We worked hard to make the script right.
Yeah, there's a few lines in there that's like, I wrote that, that's cool. But the point is, if you've got a box of toys to play with, what's the point handing the box of toys over to somebody else to play with? Because you want to play with your own toys. So that's really what we always wanted to do. And then so we started to commission scripts and develop things. By developer, the industry is different. The film and telly industry talks about development being the thing you do before production. So you have to swap heads, really, when you're talking about different industries. So we're developing scripts and things for film and TV, and we're actually investing. So we've got our first fully funded feature film, School's Out Forever, based on one of our Abaddon books, going into production. Is it 3 weeks from now?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
2 weeks-ish. Yeah. Actually, physical.
And that goes into production at your own studio space?
Yes, partly the studios, partly on location in London, and partly on location in Ipswich. It's about the apocalypse in a boys' public school.
Right.
So,
which are not too
which
far
are
apart,
actually
really.
broadly the same, quite frankly. So that's exciting. One of the challenges was, though, there's a lot of development, a lot of filming going on in the UK at the moment, and there just isn't enough space. I think the government said there's a shortage of 2 million square feet studio space. And we were looking around, and one of the things, we want to be materially involved. We're going to have to bring in professionals to help us with production and stuff. But we wanted to be able to be there all the time when they're being made, because that's fun, and that's really what we do it for. And it wanted to be close, and there wasn't anywhere available. Pinewood's booked up, Shepperton's now booked up fully for 10 years.
Oh, is that the Netflix deal?
Yeah. Netflix basically bought Shepperton for 10 years. Pinewood are full when they're at 85 to 87% capacity, so their paperwork says. They're at 96% capacity now, so they basically have no wiggle room for anything. We just couldn't find any space to do anything at any reasonable price. There was a few places, there's some places in Cardiff, but Cardiff's a beautiful place, but it's a damn long drive from Oxford. So I didn't want to do that. So we looked and we found a place. So we decided to do the rebellious thing and actually find a place that we could convert into studios. So we've got a 12-acre site, 250,000 square foot of studios, one of which is there's a massive soundproof envelope that was built around a newspaper Printworks. And the Printworks itself has come out entirely, and there's an enormous set of chambers there, which are all soundproofed, which is exactly what you need for a studio. So we've got a ready-made studio there. So we acquired that. That's we've merged. That's our second set of studios, along with Audio Motion's Wheatley Studios. And
after many years, I've been to your offices of kind of saying, well, there's a bit of space out the back, but really we're at capacity in this office.
We have built,
and there's a lot of people in there. There's 2,000 AD at the back, and there's development teams and QA and marketing, and there's your guys' offices, and it's all in this one big space, really. And now you're like, oh well, we've got 4 football fields worth of extra space over there.
Correct, more than 4, yeah.
Well, there's a big warehouse at the back of our Oxford studio, which we have just converted to offices.
So we've got 2 more spaces out the back, which you haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
It's not open yet, but we expanded into that studio, into that warehouse.
Waiting for the sign-off from building control.
Yeah, I remember when we first moved into the Oxford studios, it was quite a big space, and I remember putting my arm out and thinking, all right, people are so small that I can cover them with my thumb, so that's...
We joked about having binoculars or telescopes to look out of our offices of people.
It's big open space.
We never did.
It's big open space.
Could do drones, fly along and just check people, and fly back again.
But the idea was to have a big open space which could be flexible. If we need a small team, we can have people work together. If it's a big team, we can have a big team working together, and we move people around.
It's communication.
Yeah.
You could just walk past and see what someone's doing, the little huddles, and you're not getting this gopher popping up, having a look around and popping down.
I think it's really important for coders, artists, designers, QA to all work together, because they're all in the same team. They all should be pulling in the same direction, trying to make the best game possible. And silos prevent that kind of communication. So an open plan office works really well, has worked really well.
You get those communications, so you get the idea is to kind of have the leads in the middle, so code and art, and then just filtering out so you've got multiple connections.
To concentric rings around the key coordinating people of the project. But the studios are interesting because we've got Rogue Trooper is very likely to start filming there in the new year. That's with Duncan Jones, so we've got the script for that, which is looking great. Very exciting, that. And there's a couple of other projects as well, which hopefully should go in there next year now, isn't it? Yeah, next year, 2020.
Yeah, thinking ahead, looking ahead several years.
How does that then fit in with the games? I mean, apart from the IPs, is there synergy with the current games?
Do you know what? There's quite a lot of VFX synergy. There's a lot of parallel, kind of components and artwork and everything is very similar. 80% of VFX is done broadly the same way we do it for computer games. It's just they're not real time, and they could spend longer per frame, and they could put more fidelity per frame.
It's broadly the same tools. Brush, those sorts of things.
So there's definitely that. Production skills are transferable as well. There's a possibility. I mean, again, we're not going to make movies and telly of our games or of our books. We'll be doing originals as well.
Right.
So the idea is to tell good stories and entertain people. And content is the only thing that really matters in the creative industries. It doesn't matter. I liken it sometimes to making a phone call. If I make a phone call to somebody, I just want to speak to them. I don't actually care who's carried the data or who's earned what fraction of a penny or whether it's been routed via the Maldives or anything, or as long as the signal's good. I don't actually give a stuff. Those are enormous multinational companies there, but they're all taking fractions of a penny off me, and I pay monthly, so I don't even know how much it's cost. I've stopped looking at how much my phone calls cost these days.
There are 2 fixed points. There are people who make the games, the movies, the TV, and there are people who watch them. And we don't really mind how or care how people get them. We want them just to get the cool stuff that we make.
I can see a situation, for example, when I've got my mobile screen, it might even not be might be a phone, it's a communication device of some description. I say, I haven't watched the original Star Wars movie in ages, so can I watch it please? And my personal assistant goes, sure, and it starts showing the original Star Wars for me. I haven't got a clue who I've paid.
Who you've paid.
Or nor do I give a shit, quite frankly. I want to watch Star Wars.
Yeah.
I may have paid 10 quid, 5 quid, 7p, whatever, I don't know.
Yeah.
And somebody will have served that
To
to me.
Netflix, Amazon,
Yeah.
Disney,
Yeah.
Hulu.
Yeah, and so arguably things like Netflix is a big important company, of course, at the moment, but they've got to build up a back catalogue, they've got to build up a value, which is in their content. And that's why they're commissioning so much fantastic stuff. Because what matters, people watch Netflix because of the content,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Bit different for people like Amazon. You know, Amazon can sell you toilet rolls and content, so they've got something else to sell you.
Eventually,
so they've got a different
all
business
those
model.
silos and all those delivery platforms and brands become less important. It just becomes, you think,
Yeah, it's
eventually
the
it just
content
becomes
that they own
content
that's hugely
consumer.
important. Yeah, really.
Okay.
Have you answered questions?
Well, I've got to the end.
No,
It says conclude here. So we are also running short of time.
Are there any questions?
Someone else might have some questions. Exactly. Any questions? Oh, there we go. Straight in.
Who used to work for us? Is there someone who didn't work for us that we could actually ask a question?
Go on, quickly, Matt.
Go on then, Matt.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the world has kind of turned towards this games as a service. You guys have always been doing premium things. We see a lot of big new companies are doing games as a service, which means they'll basically be on that same product for a very, very long time. But a lot of the value talked about yourselves is the portfolio. Just you've got this huge range of different things that you do and create. Do you think that new companies coming out now will ever be Rebellion in 25 years in the same place that you are now with that portfolio?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? The long duration games as a service, is fraught with some difficulties at the moment. You know, there's all the controversy around loot boxes, there's controversy around free to play. I think these are conversations that we have to have as an industry, and quite frankly, the general public has to work out what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. It all comes down to spiraling budgets for the biggest projects. You know, if it's costing you $150 million to make a project, and you know the traditional market is only going to bring you 60 million in, well, you've got to find a way of squeezing more money out, because you've got shareholders who want to see endless growth. It comes back to this whole thing of not having shareholders and not having to do endless growth. So I think there's some challenges there. The other issue for me is how much do those projects cannibalize each other? So if you're somebody like EA and you need to make lots of projects, but you want those projects to last for 4 or 5 years, you're putting lots of money into project 1, now project 2 is launched, and you want that to last for 4 or 5 years. Are you marketing that to the same people that you actually want to stay in project 1 and project 2? I think there's a lot of complexity there for them to get their heads around. I mean, for us, we want to extend the lifetime of our projects and this long tail, but we're looking at doing that with not with loot boxes, but with things like DLC and, you know, elements that make sense. You know, buy this additional adventure, this additional level for whatever number of quids it is. So it's a sort of clear and obvious transaction for somebody. Yeah, we dabbled in the free-to-play space a little bit, didn't we? We had a couple of free-to-play titles and learned quite a lot about it.
Well, the trouble with the free-to-play at the moment is it's down to the guys with the biggest acquisition budgets.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you look at companies that, they've done 2 billion turnover, yeah, but they spent 1.8 billion on user acquisition, or as we used to call it, advertising. So their margins are very thin.
So those, sometimes you could imagine those are quite brittle business models. It doesn't take much. As anybody that works in leverage derivatives knows, you can make a lot of money, but you can lose a lot of money very quickly. And if your business model is quite brittle, like if you're a developer and you've got one project for one publisher, and that publisher finishes the project, that's a brittle business model. If you've got 2 projects for 2 different publishers, there's less brittleness there. So if one fails, you've still got the other to fall back on. And some business models in free-to-play are quite brittle. You can imagine it doesn't take much for the delta to change before making 200 million becomes losing 200 million a year.
Any more questions? I think we've got some hands up the back.
People at the back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Run, microphone man.
Yeah, back there.
Back there.
Stick your hand up.
Oh, there he is.
I've been seeing a lot of talk about the transition and merger between video games and the movie industry. So things like Bandersnatch, where they're sort of blurring the lines. It seems like you guys are now ideally suited to experiment in that area. Do you think you will in the future?
Experimenting with interactive movies has been done for decades and failed every single time. Personally, I don't know. I think something might happen there. I think VR is an interesting area for movie entertainment, sort of more movie-like experiences to overlap into games. I think it's a bit like saying, can you merge books and games? Yes, you can. They're called game books and choose your own adventure and all that kind of stuff. Not a big part of the industry, but a functional part of it. I think that games and movies do something different. Games and television do different things. They entertain in a different way. One is much more active and one is much more passive. And if people near here know about Venn diagrams, you know, the idea of smushing the two together is you get every audience, but you might actually only get the overlap, which is not good.
And there's certainly been times in the past where we've had the film industry come in and say, hey, we're going to show you games, guys, how we make the games.
Oh yeah, we've had that. Do you remember the Cyber Awards? What was it in Hollywood?
Cybermania, or as we call it,
Cybermania Awards, the
yeah.
first attempt by Hollywood to capture the video games industry. Yes. It was black tie event. They had proper seat fillers. Somebody leaves to go to the loo, somebody sits in there.
And the culmination was Best Actor in a video game.
Best Actor and Actress in a video game. They'd had a presentation on how video games are made, and it was a five-step process. Step one, write the script. Yeah. Step two...
I can't remember half of them, but the last step was add the interactivity.
Add the game. The step 5 in making a computer game was make the game. I think it was write the script, cast the actors, film the actor's performance, edit the actor's performance, and then add the computer game at the end. It was absolutely awesome. We were sitting there in our rented tuxedos as probably the only people actually in the games industry in the whole of the place.
It was genius.
Just absolutely fucking dreadful. It was astonishing, proper Hollywood nonsense. Brilliant. And it was Caesar's World of Boxing on Philips CDI that won Best Game.
Yeah.
It was great. It was like that. It was like, what? Nobody played that.
So, no, you'd need a bloody good reason to make a crossover video game.
Yeah, I really don't think those two areas cross over very well, I have to say. I think they're intriguing and I think they could do, but I think it's very, very difficult and very expensive to do well. Let's face it, it's really expensive to make a linear television program, really expensive to make a linear film, and that's with one ending. You make one with 6 endings where you're obviously going to be increasing your production quality or spreading your production money more thinly over those 6 endings. And the trouble with having 6 endings is, are most people going to watch all 6, or are most people going to watch one and go, kind of, that was curious, okay, fine, I'm done now, I'll go on to the next thing. So you're wasting all of that production value. So I think there are lots of tensions and difficulties in that area. Yes, we are ideally placed for it though. And virtual production, for example, is an area that Audio Motion are building up, one of our divisions. They're doing a lot of work in the virtual production space. So that's sort of using games technology to do pre-viz and post-viz for movies and production in general. So the overlap might not be where you think it is in terms of the end product. It might be more in the production process.
Cool. Anyone else? Oh,
just
back there. Oh, are we out of time? Oh, God, we're out of time.
Sorry. Ask us afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can find us, we're off.
That was rather abrupt, yeah.
That was.
I don't like this being...
There are other sessions.
Well, at least it wasn't that.
To go to.
At least it wasn't that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I hope you'll... I'm going to ask you to clap, but yeah, they're brilliant. Thank you very much. Cheers.